Welcome to Globewise Entertainment. Today, we're diving deep into the wild, shocking, and absolutely banned world of cinema with 14 most brutal 1970s exploitation films that got banned. From violent prison horrors to controversial shockers, these films pushed the limits of taste, morality, and censorship, leaving audiences stunned and censors outraged. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, hit that subscribe button now and join our community of movie lovers who crave the shocking, the hidden, and the unforgettable. And tell us in the comments, which of these banned 70s films would you dare to watch? 14. Pink Flamingos, 1972. John Waters' shock masterpiece. If you think cinema can't shock you anymore, think again. John Waters' Pink Flamingos isn't just a movie, it's a rebellion against everything polite and sanitized about 1970s America. Released in 1972, this underground cult classic became infamous for its relentless pursuit of the grotesque, the outrageous, and the downright disgusting. At its core, Pink Flamingos tells the twisted story of Divine, a drag queen who proudly proclaims herself the filthiest person alive, battling rivals to claim this bizarre crown. But don't expect a typical narrative. This film thrives on shock value, from outrageous costumes and unfiltered sexual escapades to scenes that made audiences recoil in horror. One infamous moment even involved the consumption of dog feces on camera, a moment that ensured the movie's instant notoriety and widespread bans. Why was it banned? Because Pink Flamingos wasn't just provocative, it attacked societal norms head-on. It challenged ideas of decency, gender, and morality in ways no mainstream film dared. For censors and conservative audiences, it crossed every imaginable line. Yet, it was exactly this extremity that cemented its cult status, turning John Waters into the Pope of trash cinema. Today, Pink Flamingos isn't just remembered as a shock film, it's celebrated as a fearless act of cinematic rebellion. Its influence is visible in underground art, queer cinema, and the countless directors who learned that cinema could be as anarchic as it was entertaining. Fun fact, despite, or perhaps because of, its ban, Pink Flamingos became a box office sensation in midnight screenings, proving that controversy sells. In the world of exploitation cinema, nothing screams cult classic louder than a film that dares to be banned. Snuff, 1975. The infamous shock film that sparked outrage worldwide. If you thought the 1970s pushed the boundaries of cinema, Snuff took it to terrifying new extremes. Released in 1975, this film became notorious not just for its content but for the real-life urban legend that surrounded it, rumors that it depicted actual murders on screen. The story begins innocently enough, or at least it seemed. Marketed as a gritty, exploitation shocker, Snuff follows a group of people caught in a nightmarish web of violence and depravity. But what set it apart, and what caused public hysteria, was a scene added purely for shock value, the infamous ending, which claimed to show a real killing. Studios marketed it as a film you will never forget because it's real, igniting protests, police investigations, and international bans almost immediately. Critics called it morally reprehensible, while censors across the globe refused to let it play in theaters. In many countries, it was outright banned, cementing its place in exploitation history. Despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy, Snuff became a cult phenomenon. It symbolized everything the 1970s exploitation era represented: audacity, rebellion, and the relentless push to see just how far cinema could go. For modern audiences, the movie serves as a stark reminder of how media can manipulate perception, blurring the lines between fiction and reality. While today's standards would never allow such marketing tactics, Snuff's legacy endures as one of the most talked about and reviled films of the decade. 12. In the Realm of the Senses, 1976. A forbidden passion that shocked the world. If you think cinema has ever pushed boundaries, nothing did it quite like In the Realm of the Senses. Released in 1976, this Japanese-French co-production wasn't just controversial, It was scandalous. Based on a true story from 1930s Japan, the film follows the obsessive and erotic relationship between Sada Abe, a former prostitute, and her lover Kichizo Ishida. What started as desire spiraled into an all-consuming obsession that blurs the line between love and destruction. Director Nagisa Oshima didn't hold back. The film features explicit sexual content so graphic that it was banned in Japan for over a decade and heavily censored in most countries worldwide. Audiences were confronted with a raw, uncompromising look at passion and human desire, forcing viewers to question morality, obsession, and the very nature of intimacy. But beyond the shock value, in the realm of the senses, is an artistic masterpiece. Oshima's meticulous direction, combined with haunting cinematography and psychological tension, elevated it from mere exploitation to cinematic provocation. It challenged societal norms and became a symbol of artistic freedom, even as it faced bans, arrests, and worldwide outrage. Watching it today, you can't help but feel the intensity. This is a film that doesn't just tell a story, it consumes you. For fans of controversial cinema, it remains a must-see example of the extremes of 1970s exploitation filmmaking. Fun fact: the infamous ending scene mirrors the real-life crime that inspired the film, making it both historically shocking and disturbingly intimate. 11. Women in Cellblock 9, 1978. If you think the 1970s were wild, wait until you step inside the grim, steel walls of Women in Cellblock 9. This wasn't your average prison drama, it was a full-blown exploitation nightmare, pushing boundaries so far that theaters around the world slammed the doors shut. Set in a fictional South American prison, the film follows a group of women trapped in a system ruled by cruelty, corruption, and sadistic guards. From the very first scene, viewers are thrown into a harrowing world of violence and abuse, where every corridor feels like a trap, and every guard hides a dark secret. The movie's unflinching portrayal of sexual exploitation and physical torment shocked audiences and censors alike. What makes Women in Cellblock 9 infamous isn't just the violence, it's the raw audacity with which it showed what most films of the era tiptoed around. Torture, betrayal, and the women's desperate fight for survival dominate every frame, creating a sense of tension so palpable that many viewers walked out in sheer horror. Unsurprisingly, this led to widespread bans across Europe and Latin America. Critics called it unwatchable and morally corrupting, while exploitation fans hailed it as a shocking masterpiece of the genre. Its legacy? A cautionary tale of what happens when cinema takes cruelty and sensationalism to the extreme, but also a reminder of the cult allure of forbidden films. If you've got the stomach for the darkest corners of 1970s cinema, Women in Cellblock 9 remains a chilling watch, one that embodies the brutal heart of the era's exploitation craze. Fun fact: despite its notoriety, the film has gained a cult following among exploitation aficionados, who see it as a bold statement on survival, power, and human depravity in closed-off worlds. 10. Love Camp 7, 1969. When exploitation crossed the line. By the late 1960s, exploitation cinema was already pushing moral boundaries, but Love Camp 7 didn't just push them. It bulldozed straight through. Released in 1969, right on the edge of the 1970s exploitation boom, this infamous shocker became one of the most controversial grindhouse films ever made, and a blueprint for why censorship boards around the world came down hard. On the surface, Love Camp 7 follows a familiar pulp setup. Two female Allied agents infiltrate a notorious enemy prison camp to rescue a captured scientist. It sounds like a standard wartime thriller. But what unfolds is anything but standard. The film immediately dives into a world designed to disturb, one where power, cruelty, and humiliation are used not as background elements, but as the main attraction. What made Love Camp 7 especially brutal for its time wasn't just the setting, it was the intent. Director Lee Frost framed the story to shock audiences into discomfort, blending wartime imagery with exploitation tropes that were considered unthinkable in mainstream cinema. The villains were exaggerated, the atmosphere was relentlessly grim, and the film leaned heavily into taboo themes that many countries refused to tolerate. As a result, bans quickly followed. In several regions, Love Camp 7 was outright prohibited, while in others it was heavily cut or driven underground. Even grindhouse theaters, known for showing the most extreme content available, sometimes hesitated to screen it. The controversy alone became part of its marketing, turning the film into a whispered legend among cult cinema fans. Yet, despite, or because of, its reputation, Love Camp 7 survived. Over time, it became a reference point in exploitation film history, a clear example of how far filmmakers were willing to go in the name of shock value during cinema's wildest era. Today, it's discussed less as entertainment and more as a cultural artifact, representing a moment when censorship, morality, and commercial provocation violently collided. Love it or loathe it, Love Camp 7 earned its place on this list not because it was popular, but because it was unforgettable. It stands as a warning sign from exploitation cinema's darkest corner, proving that sometimes a film gets banned not for what it shows, but for how boldly it dares to show it. Coming up next, even more brutal, controversial films that pushed 1970s exploitation to the breaking point. Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment for the untold stories cinema tried to bury. 9. Caligula, 1979. The Roman Empire like you've never seen before. If you thought historical dramas were safe and classy, Caligula shatters that illusion in the most shocking way possible. Released in 1979 and directed by Tinto Brass, this film promised to explore the notorious decadence of Rome under Emperor Caligula, but it went way beyond anything audiences could imagine. Caligula became infamous for its explicit sexual content, graphic violence, and unflinching portrayal of political corruption. It wasn't just a film, it was a scandal wrapped in a toga. Featuring big names like Malcolm McDowell, Helen Mirren, and Peter O'Toole, it blurred the lines between mainstream cinema and hardcore adult content, leading to bans and heavy censorship in dozens of countries. Audiences were horrified and fascinated. Scenes of sadistic power plays, orgies, and shocking executions pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable on film in the 1970s. Some theaters refused to screen it, others edited it heavily to avoid legal trouble. Yet, this controversy only fueled its cult status, making it a legendary example of exploitation cinema's boldest extremes. Beyond the scandal, Caligula also offered an unflinching look at the destructive nature of unchecked power. Its mix of historical intrigue, eroticism, and graphic violence has cemented it as a notorious cinematic experiment, both reviled and revered by film lovers around the world. Fun fact, despite its adult content, major stars like Helen Mirren and Peter O'Toole appeared fully aware of the film's controversial edge, showing how even Hollywood heavyweights could be seduced by the allure of taboo-breaking cinema. Caligula isn't just a movie, it's a cautionary tale about ambition, power, and the extreme lengths exploitation cinema would go to in the 1970s. For those brave enough to watch it, it's an unforgettable and undeniably shocking experience. 8. The Devils, 1971. Prepare yourself for one of the most shocking films ever made in the 1970s, Ken Russell's The Devils. This is not your typical period drama. Loosely based on Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun, the movie dives headfirst into scandal, religious hysteria, and political corruption in 17th-century France. The story follows Urbain Grandier, a charismatic priest accused of witchcraft by a fanatical convent of nuns. What follows is a nightmarish descent into paranoia, violence, and sexual obsession. From grotesque exorcisms to disturbing imagery, Ken Russell pushed the boundaries of what cinema could portray at the time. Upon its release, The Devils shocked audiences and censors worldwide. Entire scenes were cut, or outright banned, in several countries. The film's infamous Nuns in Hellfire sequence and graphic depictions of religious and sexual corruption were deemed blasphemous, making it one of the most controversial films of the decade. In the UK and the US, it faced heavy censorship, with many theaters refusing to show it. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, its notoriety, The Devils has gained a cult following. Film enthusiasts praise it for its fearless artistic vision, haunting cinematography, and bold critique of power, fanaticism, and oppression. Watching it today, you can feel the same scandalous energy that made audiences gasp in 1971, though now it's studied as a masterpiece of daring cinema rather than purely a forbidden spectacle. Why it matters? The Devils isn't just brutal for shock value. It's a vivid reminder of how art can challenge authority, push societal boundaries, and force audiences to confront uncomfortable truths. Ken Russell didn't hold back, and neither should you when exploring this cinematic nightmare. 7. Faces of Death, 1978. The shocking reality you weren't ready for. If you think you've seen it all, Faces of Death will haunt your nightmares. Released in 1978, this controversial shockumentary claimed to show real-life death and extreme human suffering, and it did so with an unflinching, often grotesque lens that made audiences gasp, vomit, and question the very nature of cinema. The film, directed by John Allen Schwartz under the pseudonym Conrad Brooks, blurred the lines between reality and staged horror. It included scenes of accidents, suicides, animal killings, and other grotesque acts. The most shocking part? Many viewers believed every scene was real, and some still do to this day. This mixture of documentary style and exploitation gore made it one of the most infamous films of the 1970s. Why it got banned? Authorities around the world quickly deemed it too disturbing and morally corrupting. Many countries outright banned it, while in the US, it faced heavy censorship, often being relegated to underground video shops and late-night, midnight movie screenings. Critics labeled it obscene and irresponsible, yet its notoriety only fueled curiosity. Cultural impact. Despite, or perhaps because of, its shock value, Faces of Death became a cult phenomenon. It inspired countless imitators, influenced the burgeoning horror and splatter genres, and is still referenced in pop culture as the ultimate example of exploitation cinema pushing the boundaries of taste. Viewer discretion. This is not a film for the faint of heart. Graphic content, real and staged, will challenge your perception of morality, death, and human fascination with the macabre. Watching it is like peering into the darkest corners of society, raw, shocking, and unforgettable. Whether you see it as a morbid curiosity or a cinematic atrocity, Faces of Death stands as a grim testament to the extremes 1970s exploitation filmmakers would go to shock audiences, and why some movies were simply too brutal to survive mainstream release. 6. Elsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Get ready, because this is not your average war movie. Elsa, She-Wolf of the SS takes exploitation cinema to a level that most theaters and censors couldn't handle. Released in 1975, this infamous Nazi exploitation film combined the horrors of the Holocaust with sexual depravity, torture, and shocking violence in a way that pushed boundaries so far, it was quickly banned in multiple countries. The plot follows Elsa, a seductive but sadistic Nazi commandant who runs a concentration camp with a mix of cruelty and lustful obsession. What made this film so notorious wasn't just its historical setting, it was the graphic depictions of torture, sexual domination, and shocking psychological abuse. Audiences and critics alike were horrified, but in the world of exploitation cinema, horror sells. And this movie became legendary for precisely that reason. From gruesome whippings to twisted experiments, Elsa, She-Wolf of the SS earned its reputation as one of the most disturbing films ever made in the 1970s. Its controversial content and extreme themes made it an instant target for bans worldwide, but it also secured a cult following among fans of shock cinema. Watching it today, it feels like peering into a dark, forbidden corner of film history, an experience that is equal parts fascinating and deeply unsettling. Why it matters? This movie represents the peak of exploitation, a subgenre that exploited real-world horrors for shock value. While mainstream audiences recoiled, underground cinema enthusiasts embraced it, ensuring its place in exploitation film history. If you think you can handle Elsa's terrifying reign of terror, this film is a must-watch, but don't say we didn't warn you. 5. Thriller. A Cruel Picture, 1973. The shocking revenge saga that terrified the world. If you think modern revenge thrillers are intense, wait until you dive into Thriller, A Cruel Picture, a Swedish exploitation masterpiece that pushed the limits of 1970s cinema. Released in 1973 and immediately labeled controversial, this film is notorious for its extreme violence, shocking content, and unflinching depiction of a young woman's brutal journey from victimhood to vengeance. The story follows Mona, a quiet young woman who becomes the target of abduction, drugging, and sexual exploitation. The film doesn't shy away from showing her suffering, making audiences squirm in discomfort, so much so that many countries outright banned it. But what sets this film apart from typical exploitation fare is its raw, relentless narrative of empowerment through revenge. Mona transforms from a helpless victim into a lethal avenger, taking justice into her own hands in a series of unforgettable, grisly confrontations. Director Bo Arne Vibenius didn't hold back. The film's controversial reputation stemmed not only from its graphic content but also from its innovative action sequences and hyper-stylized direction. The brutal scenes, including shocking shootouts and meticulously staged confrontations, have since influenced countless cult classics and even Hollywood revenge films decades later. While the world initially condemned it, today, Thriller, A Cruel Picture is celebrated in cult cinema circles as a raw, unflinching look at trauma, rage, and justice. It's a must-watch for fans of gritty 1970s cinema who can stomach its disturbing, but undeniably cinematic, brutality. Fun fact: Quentin Tarantino has cited this film as a major inspiration for his own stylized revenge narratives, and its rape-revenge storyline is considered a blueprint for modern exploitation thrillers. If you love shocking cinema that pushes every boundary, Thriller, A Cruel Picture isn't just a film, it's an experience that lingers long after the credits roll. 4. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978, the controversial revenge classic. If you thought 1970s cinema was wild, nothing prepared audiences for I Spit on Your Grave, a film so brutal it was banned in multiple countries and sparked decades of debate. Directed by Meyer Zarki, this exploitation horror pushed the boundaries of violence and morality, creating one of the most infamous revenge films of all time. The story follows Jennifer Hills, a young writer seeking solitude in a remote cabin to work on her novel. But her peace shatters when a group of local men brutally assaults her in a scene so shocking that it caused censorship boards to pull the film from theaters worldwide. What makes this film notorious isn't just the horrific attack, it's Jennifer's chilling and relentless revenge, which turns the tables on her assailants in ways that are equal parts satisfying and disturbing. Despite the graphic content, I Spit on Your Grave became a cult classic, influencing countless revenge films in the decades that followed. It sparked debates about whether cinema should show such explicit violence, especially against women, and whether revenge films glorify retaliation or simply reflect dark human realities. The film's controversy made it a goldmine for exploitation cinema enthusiasts. While critics initially condemned it as gratuitous and misogynistic, modern audiences often view it as a complex story of survival, justice, and empowerment in the face of unimaginable horror. For viewers brave enough to watch, I Spit on Your Grave is a shocking yet compelling journey into the darkest corners of human cruelty and the extreme lengths one person will go to reclaim power. Its banned status only added to its notoriety, turning it into a must-see for fans of cult horror and exploitation cinema. Fun fact: the movie was so controversial that several countries didn't allow it in theaters until decades later, and when it finally returned, it became a symbol of underground 70s horror culture. 3. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, A nightmare that redefined horror. If you think you've seen scary, think again. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Tobe Hooper, didn't just frighten audiences, it shocked the world. Released in 1974, this low-budget masterpiece became a landmark in the exploitation horror genre, but it was so brutal and relentless that it was banned in several countries. The film follows a group of friends who stumble upon a seemingly abandoned farmhouse in rural Texas. What begins as a harmless visit quickly turns into a fight for survival against a family of sadistic cannibals, led by the infamous Leatherface, wielding his terrifying chainsaw. Unlike the glossy horror films of the era, Hooper's work is raw, unrelenting, and disturbingly realistic, leaving audiences horrified and captivated. What made it even more terrifying wasn't the blood. There was very little on screen, but the intense suspense, unsettling atmosphere, and the implied horror. Viewers felt like they were right there in the desolate Texas countryside, trapped with the characters, and that's what made it unforgettable. The film's controversial content led to outright bans in the UK, Germany, and parts of Australia, earning it a reputation as one of the most infamous films of the 1970s. Critics were divided. Some called it a sickening nightmare, while others hailed it as a revolutionary piece of cinematic horror. Over time, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre became a cultural phenomenon, inspiring countless remakes, sequels, and even video games. Its influence can still be felt in today's horror films, proving that sometimes the most banned movies are the ones that leave a lasting mark. Fun fact: the chainsaw used in the film wasn't real for most scenes, but the sheer intensity of the sound and Leatherface's terrifying presence made it one of the most feared characters in cinema history. If you thought you could handle horror before, this movie will test every nerve in your body. And that's exactly why it earned a spot on our list of the 14 most brutal 1970s exploitation films that got banned. 2. The Last House on the Left, 1972. A shocking descent into vengeance. Imagine a movie so raw, so unflinching, that audiences walked out in sheer horror. That was The Last House on the Left, Wes Craven's debut feature, released in 1972. A film that didn't just push boundaries, it bulldozed through them. Inspired by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, Craven's vision stripped away art house subtlety and replaced it with a gritty, visceral experience that would define 1970s exploitation cinema. The story follows two teenage girls on a quiet getaway, only to fall prey to a sadistic gang of criminals. What unfolds is a nightmare of cruelty, assault, and moral collapse. Craven didn't shy away from showing the horrific consequences of violence. The film's depiction of torture and revenge was so intense that it sparked riots in theaters and earned bans in multiple countries, including the UK, Australia, and Norway. What makes The Last House on the Left unforgettable isn't just its brutality, but its chilling exploration of revenge. The parents of one of the victims take justice into their own hands, blurring the lines between victim and perpetrator. By the end, viewers are left questioning morality itself, a bold move that most mainstream films of the era would never dare. Even decades later, its reputation as a cornerstone of exploitation horror remains intact. Today, it's studied not only for its shock value but for its influence on horror cinema, inspiring countless directors who want to capture raw, unfiltered terror. Why it was banned: extreme depictions of sexual assault and graphic violence. Audiences were unprepared for such a realistic portrayal of human cruelty. Fun fact: Wes Craven intentionally used amateur actors and a documentary-style approach to heighten the realism, making every horrifying moment feel terrifyingly authentic. For fans of shock, grit, and horror that lingers long after the credits roll, The Last House on the Left is a brutal, unforgettable ride. A true 1970s exploitation classic that earned its place in banned film history. 1. Witchfinder General, reissued in the 1970s. A brutal descent into fear. In the early 1970s, horror fans were in for a shocking revival of a film that had already stirred controversy a decade earlier. Witchfinder General, originally released in 1968, found new life in the 1970s, and this reissue pushed its terrifyingly brutal imagery right into the public eye. Set in 17th century England during the height of the witch hunts, the film follows Matthew Hopkins, the self-proclaimed Witchfinder general, a man whose cruelty knows no bounds. Played chillingly by Vincent Price, Hopkins abuses his authority to torment innocent villagers, especially women, accusing them of witchcraft to satisfy his twisted sense of power. What made this film notorious, and led to bans in several countries, was its unflinching depiction of torture and psychological terror. Scenes of beatings, sexual assault, and public executions were so intense that censors across the UK and the US were appalled. Unlike the sanitized horrors of earlier decades, Witchfinder General forced audiences to confront the grim realities of human cruelty without a filter. Critics at the time were divided. Some called it art disguised as exploitation, while others branded it the most sadistic horror film ever made. But what can't be denied is its lasting influence. The film not only cemented Vincent Price's range beyond Gothic horror but also inspired a wave of 1970s exploitation films that weren't afraid to push boundaries in violence and moral ambiguity. Despite, or perhaps because of, its shock value, the 1970s reissue of Witchfinder General became a cult favorite. Fans seeking the darker, grittier side of horror found a film that was as historically chilling as it was viscerally horrifying. And even today, it's remembered as a benchmark for banned for brutality cinema, a movie that dared to show how terrifying humanity itself could be. So, if you thought horror in the 70s was all about cheap scares and monsters, think again. Witchfinder General proved that true terror comes from real human evil, and its legacy is one of shock, fascination, and controversy, a perfect start to our countdown of the 14 most brutal 1970s exploitation films that got banned. Thanks for watching Globewise Entertainment. That was our deep dive into 14 most brutal 1970s exploitation films that got banned, films that shocked audiences, outraged censors, and became cult legends in their own right. From twisted horrors to audacious shockers, the 70s truly knew how to push boundaries. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, hit that subscribe button now so you never miss our explorations of the wildest, most controversial, and unforgettable films from Hollywood and beyond. Now it's your turn. Tell us in the comment box, which banned 70s film would you dare to watch first? We can't wait to read your thoughts.